online, actually. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of the Almighty, the Lord of all mankind. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome again to the Parliament House, the Chamber of Parliament, for our concluding session, our final session. And this is a very important session which is going to focus, the theme is building resilience to preserve our common future. And accompanying me on the right in the podium is the chairperson of the conference, Madam Romina, whom everybody knows, and on my left is her assistant, Ali Sardar Jafri Sahib. We'll be very fortunate to have a keynote speech from one of our very dynamic members of the cabinet, who is directly in charge of the current situation vis-a-vis the floods. She is Senator Sherry Rahman. She is Minister for Climate Change. She is a very eminent former journalist like me. I'm not that eminent, but she's very eminent. And she has also been former ambassador of Pakistan to the United States of America. And before I hand over for a keynote speech, I'd just like to mention that a very important statement was made. Two important statements I'd like to draw your attention to. Number one, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. He mentioned the issue in this gigantic climate change calamity, these floods of what people say are almost biblical proportions. The issue is of climate justice. That Pakistan is facing the consequences of problems created by others, mostly in the Western countries, the pollution, the emissions, and so forth. That's number one. The issue is of climate justice, and justice means there has to be equity in what is delivered. And the second was the statement made by the Honorable Climate Change Minister, who is just going to speak to us very soon. And she said in an interview with The Guardian that there should be reparations given to countries like Pakistan which have faced this climate change catastrophe. That there should be reparations made because we are paying for the sins of others. And I think that is also extremely important. And I would now like to request Madam Sherry Rahman, she's online, that Her Excellency will now deliver the keynote speech to this August gathering. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Sherry, over to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Mushahid Hussain, Romina, the eminent chair, and distinguished participants, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, and of course the IPU secretariat and all those who have gotten together in Islamabad for this Asia Pacific Week. I'm going to be very brief because I have a flight and I thought this session was at 2 o'clock, but I think that brevity is what you need in any case. Senator Hussain has already set the stage for a great deal of the context of our arguments and our current discourse right now. The context, of course, is one of the most epic floods in living memory that Pakistan has faced. I remember calling it biblical at a time when I wasn't even sure it was, but it has turned out to be something, a climate catastrophe that we have not seen in living memory. Pakistan is, for August, just experienced 7 times, the province of Sindh experienced 7 times what rainfall that it would in any average that we know of. The rest of the country also experienced cataclysmic flooding, various other calamities associated with the flood. But well before that, 2022 has been a year of one after another climate catastrophe for Pakistan. It started with a terrible heat wave, and we became home to one of the hottest places on the planet, urban dwellings on the planet. As the mercury crossed 53 degrees centigrade, which then triggered forest fires and glacial lake outburst floods, which were very calamitous in the north. As you know, we are home to the largest number of glaciers outside the polar region. And at the same time in the south, we are home to a large delta of the river Indus, one of the biggest rivers in the world, but also the largest man-made irrigation system in the world right now. And south of Kotri, which is somewhere half of the middle of our map, at all times through the year, most times through the year, the Indus was running bone dry for the south, and Sindh, which is badly affected right now as we speak. So while we had extreme desertification, we've also had, and heat waves, we've also had shocks like this flood. The same province that went through the drought is now inundated in water, which is Sindh, and Balochistan went through very catastrophic flooding as well. Sindh right now is accessible. Parts of Sindh are only accessible by boat, unfortunately, even now. So it is the longest relief and rescue operation that I've known of, even after the 2010 floods, simply because those were riverine floods that followed a river's path. In this one, the helicopters could not even take off in the cloud bursts from the sky to reach people who were stranded in various parts of the country. Many lives were lost. You've all seen that every day. The count goes up tragically, and we are seeing a situation where I see the IPU members all using their platforms, and UNEP and others in the United Nations has been stellar in their support, including the Secretary General, who was really stumping for Pakistan's climate injustice discourse, and he said a great injustice is being done to Pakistan. Mushahid's already spoken of that. You have seen his words. But indeed, Pakistan, even to this point, represents that very atlas of human suffering that Secretary Guterres spoke about in launching the 6th IPCC report on climate change. So, this is where we stand today. And as far as climate resilience is concerned, look, honestly, we all feel that SDGs are humanity's best hope for the best possible quality of life, especially for developing countries. And for us right now, SDG 13 is obviously of particular importance and gravity. And in this whole conversation and world of building climate resilience, where we stand today is unfortunately not a good place. The agreements made at Paris, because these are all Conference of Party agreements, climate change has thankfully been led multilaterally as an international discourse, of course, driven by the UN, but it is far behind its goals, its promises and pledges. And that goes from Paris on to Glasgow and today. Obviously, progress has been made. There is a sense of responsibility that weighs on many of us, but there is also a growing sense of panic and anxiety at the accelerated pace of climate change. The fact that many countries have committed to net zero and reduction of emissions at dates like 2050 is a cause for worry, because we are seeing that the 1.5 degrees centigrade that we were talking about is probably something we are going to miss, as rich countries are still addicted to, as the UN Secretary General says, to fossil fuels. And that has caused the global warming that we are experiencing the aftershocks of. So we're very clear, of course, we need to plan better, we need to have higher adaptability, we need to have resilient agriculture and water hydromet systems that can deal with this kind of flooding, but actually no one was prepared for this level of a monster monsoon. And even our reservoirs that was supposed to store water for the south of the country became risks for the climate, for the communities nearby, because they were overflowing and became part of torrential floods. So the tools, it seems, of adaptability and ones that we spoke about need to be reinvented. The planet is clearly burning up at a much faster pace than modeled or expected. And countries like Pakistan are the ground zero for this kind of change. We are also seeing that clearly we made a humanitarian appeal, and we're still, trying to work out how we cope with 33 million affectees, many of whom are climate refugees in their own country. And we're also trying to figure out how we will keep the world's attention on these forgotten refugees of climate change. Because once the cameras go away and it's only one province left, which is inundated with 90% of that province's and 45% of the country's agriculture wiped out for the year at the very least, where will we get the tools to build this climate resilience? And the first order of the day is obviously resources. My ministry, which had, I was just telling a friend here, Shazia, off the mic, that 160 million of resilience funds were immediately repurposed for disaster relief, for first order disaster relief, because those are the resources. We have to save lives, and those are the resources available to us. So World Bank funds, ADB funds, all quickly repurposed. And we don't know where the next adaptation funding will come from. Nor has there been any global focus on adaptation funding. It's all been, let me be very plain, mitigation up till now. All the big money pledged for climate change has gone, 80% or 70% has gone towards mitigation. And look at the results. We see a planet that's burning up. We see countries that are looking like a trailer for the apocalypse to follow in many other countries. And we are facing down a complete resource crunch when looking at our own ability to stand up and even get to the rehabilitation, let alone reconstruction phase. I mean, just one snapshot of the damage done is over 6,500 metal roads have been ripped out by the water. Over 200 bridges have fallen like toothpicks to the onrushing torrents. And this is just the infrastructure, including railway lines. So the length of the country is still not in the communication lines it would have. Even our internet lines and cables were affected by the sheer magnitude and scale and velocity of the water coming in. It was like watching one of those apocalypse movies, living through it, and also the agony of seeing people actually on videos calling for help and being taken away by the water. Pakistan has actually lived through this, and it's been extremely traumatic. So questions of climate justice and why we as a less than 1% emitter are having to pay a humanitarian payload and the brunt of other people's carbon-rich lifestyles is a question that is being asked now at least high-level forums in Pakistan. It's a very legitimate question. It was asked also and resonated very powerfully by the UN Secretary General. And we expect to be raising this in a concerted and coordinated argument at not just the UN GA, but also obviously the next COP27. So, the bottom line is that if GHG emissions are not reduced, global warming will not change. And countries like Pakistan, many parts of the Asia Pacific will experience frontline losses that they have no ability to adapt to because they don't have the climate resilience funds, capacity, or that level of human resource to be agile enough to adapt that fast. Now, a fair amount of agility is required in such adaptation to disaster. And while you're adapting to a disaster, it's very difficult to think of adapting for climate resilience, but that is something we all have to do. Having said that, at the first minimum, while reparations is difficult, but certainly compensations will be the thrust and at the heart of our arguments. And loss and damage will need to be put on the climate finance agenda formally. It has always been a stepchild of the larger discourse. That will not be possible now. We are also chair of the group of 77 plus China. That's a large group of countries, much more incidentally than the 77 and we will be leveraging all our critical mass on making this kind of argument, not as an adversarial statement, but as a push towards an understanding that climate injustice and climate inaction are both dovetailed together. Inaction by the developed economies who've gotten rich on the back of fossil fuels have to now make good. They also have to scale down their emissions for the planet to reduce its warming. And it won't even happen, as you all know, in one go. Even if you reduce the emissions, it takes many years for the planet to respond as GHGs remain in the atmosphere for many years. So honestly, I think we've crossed a few tipping points here, and there's a threshold that we will not be able to go back from, that those thresholds are being crossed too routinely and without the kind of concerted action needed by the big players on climate emissions, on carbon emissions, and not enough reparations, or forget reparations, that is too adversarial and legal an instrument, but compensations as agreed at the various COPs. The bargain between the North and the South, the global North and the South, is not working. And it needs to, this broken bargain needs to be fixed in order to allow the global South to actually survive the oncoming train of climate change. It's not going to differentiate between borders. It's not going to know color of skin, and it is not going to stop at our words. Words will not be enough. So far, we have a surfeit of words. I guess then our words need to also change. So while we are, if you'll allow me to conclude now, I'm sorry if I have to rush my way out of this, but I think my time is up also. But really, we need speed and scale. We need speed and scale to build climate resilience. And the IPU is one of the most effective and optimal instruments and forums to operationalize the consensus needed at global and multilateral platforms to actually make a change, to change the needle. Right now, we are heading straight into Armageddon with global warming. Neither are we at the 1.5% target by turn of century, nor are we able to transfer the resources for adaptation that countries in the global South so desperately need to survive. As you all know, climate change knows no borders. So we look forward to hearing from you and hearing more about the crisis as it unfolds. But I will unfortunately have to leave. I will take back notes from this later and look forward to discussing this again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, there was a question from the delegation from the Islamic Republic of Iran, but the minister has to leave, take a flight. So, but we can still entertain your question.
I can respond on phone. I can respond on phone if you like.
Oh, you can respond? Okay. Please ask the question.
On the phone. On the phone.
On the phone.
Because
On the phone.
Yeah.
You ask the question. What is the question?
Here it is. Okay?
Yeah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I want to ask the question from the madam. As you told, climate justice, okay? And she is the minister of the climate. There is a different thing. The minister must do the work in the field to prevention of this crisis, okay? She is telling 7 times we have this flood in your country with different severity. And there is no zone for the climate. We have not zone, but we have safety in some countries. Which are the countries you wanted to bring together to have a friendly, at least, justice? What is the mechanism?
Let me quickly address this, Mushahid, before I leave. Yes,
Thank you.
Half the countries. Thank you. Half the countries in the field, we have a national disaster management organization with provincial PDMAs, provincial disaster management. It's they who are in the field. Our job is to form policy and negotiate. But of course, as cabinet members, I was the worst in the field, and that's why I'm not with you right now. But thank you to Iran always for standing by. Climate change is not something a country can effectively change on its own. It is something that has to change through a concerted multilateral action of big polluters and emitters, including small ones. So we have already made our mitigation targets quite ambitious. We will be reducing 50 to 60% of our emissions by 2030. But none of that, nor will our, and that was conditional on funding, which has never come, 35% of that. None of that, even if we go completely green, your country, my country, the one, it will not change the effects of climate change on us because we are too small a global emitter. The largest emitters will have to make that difference for global. We can only ask our communities to adapt, to build bigger dikes to save their villages, to rebuild infrastructure, to build higher and higher bridges so the water doesn't. This costs a lot of money. To start changing our crop patterns and land use, to start reducing pollution in our cement factories, which we started doing, by the way. So these are things that we have committed to, but have no funding for. And it is time that climate justice accounts for that. No one country's actions, especially the small emitters' actions, can change the needle or make a degree of difference that will affect our lives in terms of climate change. The global heat waves will still come even if Pakistan goes totally renewable, totally green. We are such a small emitter that the global heat waves will still come because of our geographical position. The precipitation that we saw, the flooding will likely still come. So it is something that we all need to take responsibility for, and that is why an adversarial stance is not what is needed. It is something that we need to cooperate on. But if we continue to be the front line taking the brunt of other people's emissions, and countries that are going back to coal after having committed otherwise, never having made the adaptation funds needed, then it's going to be a difficult and fraught conversation, I'm afraid, which is entirely unnecessary. If the human race is to survive, it is together, Excellency. Thank you very much. I'll just leave now.
Thank you, Sherry, for the answer. Thank you so much. I think that one of the important bottom lines of the presentation of the Minister for Climate Change is that Pakistan contributes less than 1%, actually 0.7 or 0.8% to global emissions, but we are facing, like other developing countries, the consequences of global warming and global emissions. So that's why there's a need for climate justice. And the second issue she mentioned was that this issue is borderless. It affects countries, continents, and irrespective of, there are no specific boundaries to that. And I'd like to mention in this regard the example of our region, South Asia, for example. There are delegations from Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Maldives. Sri Lanka faced the tsunami, and it was devastating. And Nepal in 2009, when Madhav Kumar Nepal was the Prime Minister, he had a cabinet meeting in the Himalayas to focus on the melting of the glaciers. And Maldives had a meeting underwater to focus on global warming, which can affect island states like the Maldives because of the global warming. So you can see the crisis is real, and so is Iran also has faced the same consequences. So we move on now, and we'll have a short video. We have a short video on climate change, and then we have the next speaker. Please be ready. It's Ms. Georgina Lloyd, a Regional Coordinator for Environmental Law and Governance of Asia and Pacific at UNEP. So first the video, then the lady. Thank you.
Why Why is everyone talking about climate change and global warming now?
Climate change is accelerating. Average temperatures and sea levels are rising. Floods, wildfires, storms, and droughts are becoming more frequent and more intense. Many people are calling it a climate crisis now. The UN Secretary General warns code red for humanity.
That's scary. So what's causing the climate crisis?
Increased greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. They occur naturally, but since the Industrial Revolution, they've increased exponentially as a result of human activity, mostly from burning fossil fuels like coal and oil.
Why greenhouse gases?
Greenhouse gases in our atmosphere absorb heat just like a greenhouse does. The most common is carbon dioxide. It stays in the atmosphere for centuries and acts as a blanket around the Earth, so our planet keeps getting hotter on average and weather patterns become more extreme. The other two most important greenhouse gases are methane and nitrous oxide, which last less time in the atmosphere but are much more potent. Scientists measure in CO2 equivalent so we can better compare.
So if we know what's causing the climate crisis, and it's mostly because of stuff we're doing, we can change it, right?
Right. Parliamentarians and global changemakers have a key role to play. We have to stop the increase in greenhouse gases and support ways to offset, like planting trees. Actions they can take are stop fossil fuel subsidies, which create the wrong economic incentives. We need to be putting a tax on carbon instead of subsidizing it. Support the transition to renewable energies like wind and solar, which are much cheaper now than fossil fuels. Sign and enforce the global methane pledge.
That was short and sweet. And now I'd like to hand over the mic to Ms. Georgina Lloyd. She is the Regional Coordinator for Environmental Law and Governance of Asia and Pacific at the United Nations Environmental Programme. Over to you, Ms. Lloyd, for your 5 to 7 minutes presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and distinguished participants, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This panel really brings into focus the compounding and interlinked issues around the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution and waste, and biodiversity loss. It is clear that climate crisis is pummeling the planet. We've seen the tragedy of climate change-induced flooding in Pakistan. Air pollution is also killing 7 million people per year, and the way we unsustainably exploit nature has led to over 1 million species facing extinction. We are in a planetary emergency that is leading to devastating impacts on people and the planet, both in Pakistan and across the globe. It is essential that we build resilience to preserve our common future. We need a sound environmental response to the pandemic and beyond. A resilient society, which is one that can withstand future shocks, including the looming increasing severity and regularity of the climate shocks, needs to be one which empowers and supports communities in vulnerable situations. Using an approach of leave no one behind and a human rights-based approach, it is possible to ensure a truly resilient society that upholds environmental rule of law, contributes to peace building and sustainable development. LNOB, or Leave No One Behind, is a central transformative promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and, of course, the SDGs. It represents unequivocal commitment of all UN member states to eradicate poverty in all its forms, end discrimination and exclusion, reduce inequalities and vulnerabilities that leave people behind, and undermine the potential of individuals and of humanity as a whole. So LNOB compels us to focus on the discrimination and inequalities that undermine the agency of people as holders of rights. In relation to this panel, we can look particularly at LNOB in relation to the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, as recognized by the UN General Assembly this year. In 2020, the Interparliamentary Union and UNEP developed a policy note entitled Green Approaches to COVID-19 Recovery, a policy note for parliamentarians. This publication highlights key sustainability topics which are very relevant for discussion on building resilience and achieving the SDGs. This note sets out 6 categories of sustainable approaches, namely 1, green infrastructure, 2, waste management and recycling, 3, clean energy, 4, green jobs creation, 5, biodiversity and nature-based solutions in infrastructure, and finally 6, the rule of law and environmental protection. It also includes over 100 examples and analysis from all around the world to support parliamentarians in addressing the challenges that they face. The policy note is available in English, French, and Russian, and it also identifies specific legislative actions building towards resilient economies, protecting biodiversity, and meeting international commitments, including those under the Paris Agreement. The new normal that we are moving towards or attempting to move towards should be green, equitable, and sustainable. So sustainable recovery, which we're discussing in this panel, it should be socially inclusive and in line with climate action and environmental protection, because we can no longer afford to prioritize short-term economic growth at the expense of nature. Investing in a green economy makes also irrefutable economic sense. The renewable energy sector has been shown to generate 2.5 times more jobs than fossil fuels and tend to have a better gender balance. In turn, cleaner air can reduce the burden of disease from air pollution, which can cost some countries 7% of their GDP. Additionally, every dollar invested in restoring ecosystems creates up to $30 in economic benefits and enhances livelihoods. Further, with the right policies in place, a green economy can yield 24 million new jobs by 2030. So parliamentarians have a very important role to play in this transition towards sustainable recovery. Parliamentarians are key players, as you are well aware, in immediate and long-term efforts to build resilience and support recovery, particularly through the power to enact laws and oversee government policy. The laws and policies that you develop will shape not only the path of recovery, but will determine how the economy of countries look for years to come, and of course link to the resilience of societies. We know that legislation is a key driver of action, and legislative measures taken now can have implications for the planet's future. As parliamentarians entrusted by the electorate, you're in a very unique position to protect the future. You must ensure that legislative measures taken now are in line with both developmental and environmental goals, and are underpinned by those core principles of LNOB. Equally important is exercising your oversight and budgeting functions in a manner that promotes a green economy. Knowing the complexity of choices and, of course, those potential solutions that are before legislators, UNEP, together with IPU, have, within the policy note that I described before, set out some key aspects of a green recovery that you can consider in your work. And I'm going to go through just 4 of these different dimensions very briefly. So the first of these dimensions is green infrastructure. Parliamentarians can prioritize laws and regulations that require public investment and incentivize private investment in green infrastructure that can contribute to creating jobs in green infrastructure and enhance related business opportunities. They can provide parliamentary oversight of government's work towards the SDGs, such as the provision of universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces. Second, waste management and circularity. So parliamentarians can look at legislation which includes tax rebates or tax waivers for recycling initiatives, can mainstream sustainable consumption and production into COVID-19 recovery efforts, including green procurement requirements. You can also, of course, support sustainable consumption and production, such as extending producer responsibility and provide legislative incentives for industry. Next, looking at biodiversity and nature-based solutions. And of course, it requires these balanced risk assessments in COVID-19 recovery and planning that consider the impacts of natural capital, such as ecosystems and biodiversity. Adopting nature-based legislation that addresses the drivers of habitat loss, such as illegal wildlife trade and deforestation and unsustainable agricultural practices, as well as allocating budgets within conservation programs. Sorry, my computer has just frozen on me. I apologize for that. And looking at sustainable agricultural initiatives and the urban green and blue infrastructure systems that reduce deforestation. And finally, if we look at the last dimension, which is rule of law, environmental rule of law, we need to ensure that COVID-19 legislation includes safeguards for environmental rights and that recovery efforts are not used to restrict these rights. Parliamentarians can exercise oversight in ensuring that existing environmental requirements are applied and encourage the adoption of innovative solutions and safeguards to enforce existing environmental law and standards. Finally, articulating the legislative process, the interests and concerns of constituents who may be more vulnerable. So we can see that a green recovery is not only a viable pathway to achieve the goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda, it is the only viable pathway. And we need to move towards this. And these are some suggestions for parliamentarians to consider. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd, and thank you for a very informative presentation. The two takeaways that I noticed is that, number one, the parliamentarians have a key role to play. You talked of their legislative role, their budgetary role, their oversight role. And that's extremely important because parliamentarians are sitting here. And secondly, you made a very important point that fossil fuels do not contribute to employment. It's the renewable energy sector. And you said they create 2.4% more jobs than fossil fuels. And I think that's a lot of good information for us. And that's a major incentive to have the transition from fossil fuels to renewables to clean and green energy. Thank you so much, Ms. Lloyd, and good luck for the future. Before I ask the other speaker, I'd like to mention that we have been graced by the former Prime Minister of Pakistan and leader of the opposition in the Senate, Senator Yusuf Raza Gilani Saab. Could you please stand up? And I also want to mention that among his various different, diverse background and track record, he's also been the Speaker of the National Assembly of Pakistan for over 3 years. Thank you, sir, for coming. Now, our next speaker is Ms. Sarah Wade Epichula, Head of Partnerships and Stakeholder Engagement at the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Ms. Sarah Wade, it's over to you for 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction with you in this very important regional seminar. My presentation will be quite complementary to that of our colleague from UNEP, Georgina Lloyd, as we look into disaster risk reduction and how this approach can support sustainable development and recovery. The socioeconomic impact of disasters on lives and development gains is starkly clear, and of course amplified by COVID-19 and the intensification of the climate crisis. As you have experienced over the past few years, and of course most acutely and recently in Pakistan, Asia Pacific, and indeed the world, has been devastated by floods, droughts, extreme heat, and other hazards combined with vulnerabilities aggravated by COVID-19. They have resulted in severe health and economic impacts. And just as we are trying to turn the tide of what was an unsustainable development pattern, throughout the Asia-Pacific region, governments have had to grapple with options and trade-offs for restarting their economic engines and putting people back to work, including in key sectors that have been the most impacted by the pandemic. Nearly everything has been disrupted, while most people may simply wish to get back to normal. Instead, now is the critical time to adopt a think resilience approach, an approach to our development and climate actions to build resilience and preserve our common future. It calls for comprehensive climate and disaster risk management. It means that we must avert our biases and shortcuts that can lead to myopia and oversimplification in risk management. Parliamentarians, using your power over legislation, monitoring, accountability, and budgeting, have a fundamental role to play in building this more resilient world. The transformative nature of the 2030 Agenda and enhanced resilience requires parliamentarians to help voice citizens' concerns to ensure that no one is left behind, while also helping to shape the governance and financing systems that are desperately needed to enable it. As you know, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 is core to achieving Sustainable Development Goals. It outlines 4 key priorities to protect development gains from the risk of disaster, including priorities to understand disaster risk, not just natural hazards, but man-made hazards and related environmental, technological, and biological hazards and their multiplier risks. It calls to strengthen disaster risk governance, including by reconfiguring governance and financial mechanisms to work across institutional silos, and of course, designing them in consultation with affected people. It calls to continuously invest in resilience, from de-risking and diversifying financing mechanisms for investment to investing in resilient infrastructure as well as nature-based solutions. And finally, it calls to enhance preparedness for effective response and to prepare for and then build back better. And I believe this became a mantra often heard since the start of the pandemic. Sendai clearly highlights the responsibility of governments to drive disaster risk reduction and prevention by integrating DRR, or disaster risk reduction, into national and local legislative and budgetary frameworks, promoting this greater understanding of risk, strengthening risk governance, and ensuring resilient investment. Indeed, Build Back Better, as one of the core elements of Priority 4, aims to utilize recovery to invest in capacity for greater resilience and preparedness for future crises. This requires establishing planning and coordination mechanisms or strengthening governance structures across ministries and working in partnership with other stakeholders. It also calls for methods and procedures to ensure that activities to build back better are adequately geared to avoid potential future risks. So again, a call to think resilience. The systemic nature of COVID crisis and climate emergency has really shown us this interconnected and multi-sectoral impact. And we can see how complex and lethal disaster risks have become. Lessons from past recovery efforts, including from disasters related to natural hazards, must be applied to ensure COVID recovery is a watershed moment to build more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable systems to avert future crises. As has been learned from past disasters, poorly coordinated recovery may lock in existing risks, thereby exacerbating it. So we cannot risk returning actually to business as usual. We must look at practices that decrease emissions, that improve the environment, and decrease disaster risk. If we don't, it's a missed opportunity. As such, every aspect of society needs to transform. Some recommendations for a risk-informed pathway include investing in that governance and institutional coordination, providing for institutional capacity building to strengthen internal processes within and across government, also from national to local, and benefiting from the private sector and civil society. 4 key elements are needed to expedite this: inspirational leadership, strong governance and mechanisms, data collection and management, and the adoption of those people-centered, leave no one behind approaches. The Bangkok principles for implementation of health aspects of the Sendai framework can provide a framework for governments to increase and integrate the health sector, for example. In addition, cities, local authorities, and communities are often the default frontline responders. There is a greater need to strengthen resilience at the local level. Second recommendation is to be innovative in financing mechanisms. During the pandemic, most countries have rolled out economic stimulus packages that formed a substantial proportion of national GDP. However, one-time stimulus, we know, is not enough to overcome the impact and plan for future risk. A good mix of projects that generate livelihoods while developing infrastructure, for example, through climate mitigation and disaster control infrastructure, and ensuring environmental sustainability through nature-based solutions, should be a key focus of the recovery stage. Third area regards resilient infrastructure investment. Pre-COVID, there was already a global infrastructure investment gap of $15 trillion US. As countries plan for recovery, we should invest in infrastructure projects that offer opportunities to address short-term job loss, long-term resilience, decarbonization objectives at the same time. The principles for resilient infrastructure developed by UNDRR to support implementation of the Sendai framework and the Sustainable Development Goals aims to raise awareness and set an understanding of what resilient infrastructure constitutes. Finally, promoting sustainable consumption and nature-based solutions. I think we've heard from our colleague from UNEP. We know that the recovery should lead to a new normal that is more equitable and climate sensitive. Already mentioned were tax reform components of stimulus packages that can also be used to harness these opportunities.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And the next speaker would be Mr. Sabar Chaudhry from Bangladesh. He's a member of the parliament, former cabinet minister, and has been also president of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, IPU. Thank you very much. Mr. Sabar Chaudhry is online.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Very warm welcome to you, sir. Keman asan to bhalo? Warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you so much. And I don't have a presentation to share, but let me first extend my greetings as well as that of the Parliament of Bangladesh. And of course, we stand in full solidarity with you as you respond to the floods that have gone across Pakistan. Thoughts and prayers for those lives that have been lost. And we certainly wish you all the very best when it comes to building back better and having a more resilient Pakistan in the future.
Thank you.
What I thought I would do is just briefly talk about some of the main concepts that I think are important here. We are living in very challenging times, and the Parliament of Bangladesh adopted a resolution on a planetary emergency, not just a climate emergency, because we see that there are a number of converging crises in the horizon over a timeline of 2040 or 2050. You, of course, have the existential threat of climate change. You have the intensity and frequency of disasters. We have just seen what is happening in Pakistan. And, we are talking about a potential loss of what, 30 billion is what you're looking at. So just one single natural hazard can wipe away all of your development gains that you've accumulated over the years. We have a crisis when it comes to water stress. Bangladesh is, if you look at the position of Bangladesh, we have the Himalayas, on the north of Bangladesh, and they are essentially the water towers for South Asia. And if with continued rise in global temperatures, you have increased glacial melt, you're going to run short of water. So water stress also becomes a major issue. We have the unprecedented loss of biodiversity. We have a food security issue. And of course, the whole issue of planetary overshoot. How do we consume and sustain our resources for the future? So it is in that context that this event is taking place. And of course, when we talk about the Sendai framework, we go back to 2015, and there were three very important defining UN agreements. So we started off with Sendai in March and April of 2015. That was followed by the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN General Assembly, and the same year, we had the agreement on climate change, the Paris Agreement. Now, what is interesting is the Sendai framework is the only instrument that specifically identifies the role of parliamentarians when it comes to building resilience. It talks about parliamentary action in terms of legislative framework, in terms of holding the government to account, in terms of strengthening legislation, setting budget allocations. So the role of parliaments is not something that we are trying to discover for ourselves. It is actually in the agreement that our various governments have signed. And now it is for us to play that role. So I think if any parliamentarian says, how do I get into the domain of the executive? Well, the executive has actually given us that mandate because this is an agreement which has been agreed by all the governments. And of course, the other aspect is the Sustainable Development Goals that we are talking about today. And let's be very candid about this. The Sustainable Development Goals are in trouble, huge trouble. I was at an event, I think a couple of months back of UNESCAP, where they were talking about a timeline of 2065 based on current trajectory for the SDGs to be realized. So, 2030, we are not on track. And in fact, I know some people talk about COVID, but I think that's more of an excuse because even before COVID, we were actually behind track. So the SDGs are in trouble. You're looking at 2065 based on current trends, business as usual. And in some cases, as for instance, with climate change, we are actually, there is regression. There is no progress. We have actually gone back to before 2015. So that, of course, presents a very steep challenge, especially for parliamentarians, given the functions that have been already talked about. And I always believe in the three Ps, the power of advocacy, the power of the purse, and the power of the policy that we as parliamentarians can bring to the table. And I think it's absolutely a critical role that we have. And it is in recognition of that role that the IPU actually came up with this toolkit for the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as jointly with the UNDRR, which is actually bringing together good practices. I don't say best practice, because best is when you, for instance, in the National Assembly of Pakistan, fine-tune it and customize to your own requirements, and then it becomes a best practice. So, and this toolkit I specifically refer to because, we always talk about the capacity of the institution of parliament, as well as the capacity of individual parliamentarians. And this is a toolkit that allows us to assess ourselves. I emphasize it's a self-assessment tool. It's not an external auditor who's actually coming and checking. And this allows us to see to what extent we as an institution or as individuals are fit for the job, are fit for purpose. So I would encourage everyone to actually look at it, because I think it's something which is extremely important. And of course, in Bangladesh, one of the areas that we are trying to look at, because we have the COP27 coming up in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh. I know that the IPU is organizing a parliamentary meeting, as it does during each of the COP, and I think that's on the 13th. I would certainly encourage all members from the National Assembly of Pakistan to join that if they are going to be in Egypt. So climate change, of course, is directly related to DRR. And what we have done in Bangladesh is we have tried to bring about a convergence between the agenda of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So earlier I talked about the glacial melt in the Himalayas. Let me just expand on that. So, you have more water which is actually flowing through the rivers of Bangladesh. And with that, what is happening is the rivers are overflooding, there is salinity intrusion, crops are being damaged. So the response of the Bangladesh government, or one of the responses, has been that we dredge the river. By dredging the river, we actually increase the capacity of the river to hold more water, so it doesn't spill over and go into the land and affect your crop. And then the material that we dredge, we are building embankments on either side of the river, so it protects the land. And then we plant trees along there. So you see, this is DRR and climate change adaptation working together. The convergence, I think, is very important because there are limited resources we have. And if we continue to treat DRR as a separate issue from climate change adaptation, I think you're going to have duplication, you're going to have inefficiencies, and you're going to have fragmentation. So one of our jobs as parliamentarians is how do we ensure value for money? How do we ensure that we get the biggest bang for the dollar? And I think this is, of course, one area where we are working very hard. And I think that's something that maybe also the National Assembly of Pakistan can consider. Finally, I end with 2 points. One is the whole concept of resilience. One of the things is we use a lot of technical terms. And do really people understand it, or do we as parliamentarians understand it? And what I mean by resilience is not just our ability and capacity to respond to a crisis, but it also our ability to actually bounce back and attain a higher level of preparedness. I think that's really what is very, very important in resilience. And whenever we talk about DRR, we never refer to it as a cost. We talk about disaster risk reduction as an investment. Because if you look at it in terms of what is the benefit of action, as opposed to what is the cost of inaction, the benefits are huge. One investment, $1 investment in DRR will save you anything from $7 to $8 upwards. So it is a smart investment. DRR is a cross-cutting issue. So it's not just agriculture. It's your food security. It is your local infrastructure. It is your health. It is your education. So this is as mainstream as it gets. And looking forward, I always say that we have to reimagine development. I think that is absolutely fundamental. Business as usual is not going to work. So we have to reimagine development. We have to look at our plans, what we build, where we build, how it is being built, to what extent are we consulting with the local people, how are we adding community knowledge. These are all very important things. And the 2 other R's, so one is reimagine development is the first R. The second R, which of course applies particularly and sadly to Pakistan at this stage, is rebuild better. So reimagine development, rebuild better. The building back better, or the building back forward, that concept. And the third R is going to be recover resilient. So it's resilient recovery. So I think if those are some of the themes that we can work on, I'm sure as parliamentarians, we can in fact create the sort of conditions and environment that will enable not just the youth of today, but also the child who is going to be born tomorrow to have the future that they really want. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Sabar Chaudhry Saheb, for a very instructive presentation, because we want to learn from the example of our neighbors, particularly Bangladesh, on this issue. And the couple of points that you mentioned, I'd just like to reaffirm. You mentioned the frequency of disaster incidents. In the last 20 years, we have had about 173 freak weather incidents, and you also expressed your solidarity, your support, your succor for Pakistan and its people, for which we thank you. And you also mentioned the costs of this crisis. As of today, the estimates are in the vicinity of about $30 billion loss to Pakistan, its economy, and lives and livelihoods of the people of Pakistan. Thank you. And now we go on to the last speaker for the session. Then we'll open it up for general debate. And I already have some names who want to speak. This is Ms. Shazia Rafi, who is the president of Air Quality Asia. And Shazia, you are speaking, I see you, in New York. It seems you are an old Islamabad person. You're quite close to home. Thank you.
Yes. I'm speaking actually, we call it a land acknowledgement. I'm speaking from Mannahatta, the land of the Lenape, which we now call New York. So, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Ministers, Honorable President of the IPU, Honorable Members of Parliament, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Salam Alaikum. We have all been witnessing an unprecedented time these past 2.5 years with the COVID-19 pandemic and the exacerbations of climate change. Over 6.5 million lives have been lost to COVID-19. Parallel to the pandemic and climate change is a silent killer that continues to claim almost 9 million lives annually around the world. The 7 million figure, I'm afraid, comes from 2014 based data, and this killer is air pollution. Hazardous air pollution, according to the Lancet, also increases COVID mortality by over 15%. Air pollution is also linked to climate change. The same carbon emissions that speed up global warming make air quality worse. Pakistan is facing the pincer of both crises together. Hazardous level air pollution and severe climate impacts of biblical level floods following intense heat waves. Since climate change is hard to measure, air quality monitoring, air pollution monitoring allows policymakers like you a measurement of progress or failure in real time. If one wants to mitigate, reduce climate change, you need to work on reducing air pollution. The challenge for South Asian governments is enormous, as the Indo-Gangetic Plain is ground zero of air pollution at hazardous levels. The topography of the region, with two major river basins flowing south and southeast of the Himalayan ranges, ensures that whatever carbon emissions are generated in the entire region stay there. Of the world's cities with the highest air pollution, 40 out of 42 are in South Asia, 4 are in Pakistan, 2 are in Bangladesh. As air pollution has no boundaries, we also impacted by transboundary pollution from the region's largest economy, which is neighbor to both our countries, India. My chance to really do something about this came after I retired from my post as Secretary General of Parliamentarians for Global Action for 2 decades, where I had worked with many of your parliaments on UN agreements and treaties related to sustainable development and human rights. In 2013, I formed the Parliamentary Working Group on Clean Air, just as the UN was starting negotiations on the SDGs 2030. Strong advocacy coalitions for water, soil, and biodiversity existed, but none for clean air. The right to clean air was proposed by us at the Interparliamentary Union meeting at the UN, November 2013, by then Chairman Senate of Pakistan, Honorable Nayyar Bukhari. It was based on an analysis provided by Honorable Justice Mansoor Ali Shah that this right was protected in the right to life in our constitution, and of course in many other constitutions. This suggestion by Honorable Bukhari was passed with the support of Mexico, Brazil, Senegal, and Denmark. This began a year's intense negotiations working with the UN's SDG 2030 co-chairs, Ireland and Kenya, and the World Health Organization. 3 clean air targets were included in the finally adopted SDGs 2030 by the UN General Assembly, September 2014, and they are 3.9, 11.6, and 12.4. They are specific, they define the sources of air pollution and the mechanisms for implementation, monitoring, and financing. Pakistan joined all member states with the Prime Minister signing the SDGs 2030 commitment. In a parallel process, Pakistan and all your parliaments ratified the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, which commits us to an overall cap on total carbon emissions. But we realized that our work had only just begun, as agreements and treaties are only as good as their implementation mechanisms. In November 2016, we set up Air Quality Asia as part of non-profit Sustainable World, affiliated with the United Nations, observer of the UN Environment Programme and the World Bank, to work with Asia's growing economies in transitioning to clean air frameworks and green economies. According to the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution, air pollution deaths have a bell curve. They rise as countries move from low income to lower, middle, and upper income and drop as they reach high income. Because our means of generating energy and means of production remain polluting, while higher income countries have more access to technology solutions that are green and clean. That differential is beginning to change as green energy, green production technologies become cheaper and more accessible. Most important for you policymakers is how to pay for this much needed transition to a clean air economy. Part of the answer lies in transitioning the country's current cost of air pollution to the economy. According to the World Bank globally, the cost of air pollution was US dollars 5.3 trillion in 2016. Pakistan's cost of air pollution in that same year was 5.8% of our GDP. Applied to 2019 GDP, it was over $15 billion that is leaking out of our economy in air pollution costs. The amount is even higher. In China, the cost to GDP was 7.6% in that year, 853 billion hit to the economy. India's was 7.8%, almost 200 billion hit to the economy. We know with global data from China, Mexico, and California which air quality improvement policies work, and we know that they generate economic benefits. China in recent years began its transition to a renewable energy green economy in 2013 after protracted negotiations with the state of California over coal plant carbon emissions crossing the Pacific in 2 weeks, leading to California failing its EPA limits in 2012. With trade in the balance, the two governments came to a unique and beneficial agreement to both. 9 years later, air pollution in China's major cities is down by 40%. During the debate, I can give more details if people want. In the US, after 3 decades, we're still struggling. I mean, we've made huge improvements, but after 3 decades of implementation of the Clean Air Act in 1970 and a strong EPA, my adopted city of New York has gone from smoke-covered skies where we could not see the top of buildings to daily air readings in the healthy range. Inequality, though, does mean that socially, economically disadvantaged, poorer parts of New York have poorer air quality. Further improvements are now in the offing. The US Congress has finally passed and the President has signed the Inflation Reduction Act with many green infrastructure items, for example, nationwide electric vehicle charging stations, replacing and rebuilding the train track systems for electric fast trains. The hurdle was always lobbying by the fossil fuel sector and by the car manufacturers whose internal combustion engine is dying out within a decade. The long-term economic benefit of a green economy is clear. According to the IMF, every dollar in renewable energy or sustainable land use has a multiplier 2 to 7 times larger than fossil fuels. However, upfront costs for energy and transportation transitions are a major hurdle for poor countries particularly, because 80% of these funds have to come from global private equity markets. Additionally, the economic benefit takes some time to pass on to the consumer, to the worker, to the private investor, industry owner, along with the national treasury. Your colleagues in parliaments across Asia Pacific are enacting green economy bills and programs. Indonesia, whose representatives from the Green Economy Caucus joined us today, are working on a renewable energy bill to transition their fossil fuel-based economy. The Philippines, a country also impacted by climate change, has a slew of bills for a green economy. One of the most interesting is House Bill 9181. The Philippine
Shazia, last 90 seconds. Thank you.
Okay, not a problem. I'll move on to just conclude. Pakistan is at this terrible juncture is the voice of the global South, calling for the global North to stop ramping up emissions and to recognize our loss and damage as part of their responsibility. The UN General Assembly on July 28, 2022 adopted the resolution recognizing the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. An ambitious debt relief plan is needed for climate stress, similar to the Brady Plan of the 1980s that allowed the US Treasuries to provide an aggregate debt reduction of $65 billion in 1980s currency level. And we look forward at Equality Asia to working with the government and parliament of Pakistan and the region on building that back better. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Shazia Rafi, for a very useful presentation and your focus, two aspects you mentioned. One, that this region where we belong to is now ground zero in terms of air pollution. That's very key. And secondly, about the horrendous, the whopping costs of air pollution you mentioned. It was in billions and trillions of dollars. And I'm very happy that we have our own Director General of the Environmental Protection Agency. Farzana, please stand up. Farzana, who is handling the Air Quality Index of Islamabad and the federal government. Thank you. And a very dynamic person handling the issue. Thank you so much. We have finished with the presentations. Now the floor will be open for general discussion, comments, questions. I already have a request for intervention by the esteemed delegate from the Islamic Republic of Iran, Member of Parliament, Excellency Mohsin Fateh. Please be clear you want to make a comment or a question. No speeches, because the speeches time is open. But you make a suggestion, make a comment, make a question or whatever. But please no speeches. Over 2 minutes is a speech.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to express our heartfelt condolences and sympathy of the people of brotherly Pakistan for the recent heavy flood that cost many lives. We would like also thank National Assembly of Pakistan for hosting this important region seminar and hospitality. We hope the result of this event will be of use for Asia and Pacific region. Thank you. Good luck.
Very much, and it was sharp and sweet, and we hope that, from Maldives? Nepal. Yes, please. Thank you, sir, for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. First of all, thanks.
First of all, to Sri Lanka,
thanks.
My heartiest congratulations on your well-deserved victory in the cricket match on Pakistan. You deserve to win.
Thanks to all the excellent presentation. Regarding this very important issues, I would like to mention something about the Nepal, because in Nepal, 44.7% of the total land area of Nepal is covered by forest, which is remarkable, and which, with an effort to conserve biodiversity, 23% of the total land area, including forest, have been declared protected. Climate change was a very key agenda in 144th IPU Assembly, and MP resolved to demonstrate strong political leadership to setting the framework required for net zero emission, and as well as at that time they agreed to enhance international cooperation for ensuring better legislative and policy measures to address the issue of climate change in a coordinated manner. So now it is a time for each of us to act on the agreement. And as well as I want to give some information regarding to the Nepal government, because in Nepal climate change is an issue very important, so it is not a priority only for the parliament or government, but as well as it should be a priority for the civil society also. And in Nepal we are starting to debate about how can we make a concept about the smart climate village and smart climate agriculture. And as well as we are debating about this climate change issue, how can we put these issues in the educational curriculum so that we can get a good result. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and your comment about, it's very important, smart climate agriculture and putting it in the curriculum. There are also attempts to that. I just want to mention, ladies and gentlemen, that Nepal is quite a good example of resilience. A small country with no natural resources, they have made the transition from civil war to peace, from dictatorship to democracy, from monarchy to republic, from federation, from unity government to federation government. And we welcome Nepal for this reason. Any other questions or comments? Korea? Yes, Republic of Korea. Aneng Hashimika, please.
안녕하십니까. 대한민국 국회의원 김미애입니다. 제3차 SDG 아시아 태평양 지역 세미나를 주최하고 준비해 주신 IPU 및 파키스탄 의회 관계자 여러분께 진심으로 감사드립니다. 홍수로 피해를 입은 파키스탄 국민에게 대한민국 국민과 함께 깊은 위로를 드리며 조속한 회복을 기대합니다. 특히 1%도 배출하지 않는 파키스탄이 기후변화의 최대 피해자라는 사실에 세계가 관심을 가지고 연대와 협력을 통해 기후위기입니다. 저는 이번 세미나를 통해 아시아 태평양 지역 각국이 처한 기후위기, 양성평등, 보건의료, 접근 불평등 등에 대한 구체적인 어려움에 대해 깊이 깨닫는 계기가 되었고 앞으로 대한민국 국회에서도
I will make sure
논의를
that these agendas are discussed
전
in further
지구적으로
depth at the
연대 협력하도록
Republic of Korea National
노력하겠습니다.
Assembly and translated into stronger cooperation.
대한민국에서는 지속
In
가능
Korea,
발전
we
기본법이
enacted the Framework
제정되어
Act on Sustainable
지난 7월
Development,
5일부터 시행 중입니다.
and it has been in effect from July 5th.
대통령 소속 지속
Through the
가능
National
발전
Committee on
국가위원회를
Sustainable
통해
Development under the President,
국내 업무를
we will
총괄하고
coordinate the activities in Korea
국제사회의
to
SDG
engage
논의
in
참여 및
international SDG
개도국내
related
SDG
discussions
달성
and support
지원을 하게
SDG
됩니다.
achievement in developing countries.
코로나19 기후
In the
위기
face
등
of
글로벌
COVID-19,
복합
we have climate change, war in Ukraine, and other multiple global challenges. We need tangible, practical efforts toward SDG implementation in order to achieve our goal by 2030. The Korean government is supporting SDG efforts in developing countries by constantly expanding its ODA volume, assisting COVID-19 response in developing countries, and strengthening cooperation with civil society. The Korean government is focusing on areas such as healthcare and ICT, where there is high demand for cooperation from developing countries in its efforts to contribute to SDG achievements. The Korean government has also been responding to the changing situation in order to end the pandemic and return to life before the pandemic. As part of our efforts, we have enacted and amended relevant statutes to establish the legal basis for swift development and distribution of COVID test kits and vaccines, as well as to support treatment for side effects from vaccination. And we also have passed additional supplementary budgets multiple times to finance our response to the pandemic. Meanwhile, this global health crisis has brought to light the issue of inequality in access to health, and especially the disparity in vaccine deployment. This is becoming a very important agenda for the international community. As of September 2022, 67.7% of the global population has been vaccinated at least once, but in low-income countries, only 21% of the population has received at least one dose. Such inequality is not simply a humanitarian issue for a specific group of people, but is greatly hampering the international community's fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. In recognition of the severity of the issue, the Republic of Korea has put in various efforts to ensure equal and fair access to healthcare and to put in place effective prevention against the pandemic. In 1999, we established a national health insurance system, and we have a very advanced healthcare system as well. So using these systems, we have tried to minimize the out-of-pocket costs for COVID-19 tests and treatments. And we also provided vaccination free of charge to everyone, while giving the highest priority to groups that are most vulnerable to infections, such as those in nursing homes and senior citizens. Also, in order to close the gap in vaccination across countries, Korea has constantly been donating vaccines to countries with vaccine shortage issues since 2021. Starting with vaccine donations to Vietnam and Thailand in October 2021, we have provided a total of 4.86 million dosages to countries such as the Philippines, Iran, Guatemala, and Mexico. I believe that the recent crisis served as an important milestone to renew our perspective on the importance of equal healthcare and solidarity in the face of risks, and also to revisit and refine policies at home and abroad. The National Assembly of the Republic of Korea will remain firmly committed to strengthening our international alliance and global cooperation to address inequality and access to healthcare and build capacity to fight these risks. Thank you very much for listening.
Kamsa Hamida, we were very appreciative of your briefing and update on the issue of vaccinations during the coronavirus pandemic. And we really appreciate the fact that the Republic of Korea has donated 4.8 million dosages to different countries of Asia, which is a gesture that is truly appreciated. And two other points which you made are very important: the vaccine inequality, because some people are getting their third doses in the advanced countries of the West and other rich countries, but in the poorer countries of the global South, even the first dose is a limited one. And I think this inequality is unacceptable, and a lot of the reasons for this is politics, geopolitics, because of vaccine nationalism. And they say that, okay, they want to control the vaccines that they have, but we are very glad that Korea has shared. And finally, I'd like to say that we should have a campaign in the Asian community, in the third world countries, in the global South, and globally as well, campaign for vaccines without borders. There should not be any political borders or any ideological borders when it comes to issues of health, coronavirus, or of course floods. And I always say that as a Pakistani, yes, we appreciate the assistance from the international community, which is very much evident, but we also feel that if the flooding was in Europe or in Ukraine, the billions of dollars would have flown in. But because it is in the third world or a Muslim country, the kind of support from the international community is not forthcoming. Thank you. Yes. Any other hands being raised, or questions or comments? From other countries? Anybody from any comment? I think there is none. So we will now have the concluding ceremony. Please remain seated in your seats. And
Sir, I want you to make one announcement.
Yes, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to bring in your notice. There are two information. One, that in all the proceedings and the pictures are available on the website of the NA and on the website of SDG Secretariat. You can get from there as well. And another thing, as nowadays it's moreover a social media time, so I just wanted to tell it's the second day IPU in Pakistan is trending top trend on the Twitter. So I just wanted to congratulate.
Thank you. So the Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly and the former Prime Minister of Pakistan will soon be coming to the podium for the final reading of the...
In 5 minutes.
Yes. Please, in 3.5 minutes, they'll be here.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. Should I take it over from you?
Yeah, please take over.
Thank you. As Madam Rumina Khurshid Alam has very well told you, ladies and gentlemen, it's a very special day in the history of Parliament, because for the first time, Parliament and the parliamentary business is trending in the top trends on Twitter. Yesterday, we also crossed that Rubicon, and today also, this conference is trending as a top trend on the Twitter. The Honorable Speaker would shortly be joining us. May I request Honorable Senator Salim Mandviwala to kindly come on the podium. Honorable Special Assistant to the Prime Minister, Shaza Fatma Khaja. Kindly come on the podium. Honorable Senator Syed Yusufzai Gilani, who is the parliamentary leader of Pakistan People's Party in the Senate and also the former Prime Minister. Sir, would you like to come on the podium? Madam. The Honorable Speaker is soon to join us. Sir. माइक खोलिएगा जी तारिक साहब का. It's the second row. खुल गया जी माइक.
Thank you very much. I'm chairperson of National Database and Registration Authority, and we register the people, we count the people so that people can count on the state. So we deal with SDG 16, Target 9. And in my previous life, when I was Chief Technical Advisor of UNDP, when we were framing these SDGs, we envisioned the intended and unintended consequences of that SDG, because it creates linkages with SDG 1, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, 11, and 17. Robust ID system designed and implemented with the SDG aspirations in mind can be catalyst for achieving development goals and targets. And since Pakistan is the pioneer in that technology, I would like to suggest and recommend that in the spirit of South-South cooperation, Pakistan would like to help the Asian Pacific countries to actually implement state-of-art system that not only count the people, empower the people, and give them access to so many programs like financial inclusion, health program, effective disaster management, combating fraud and corruption, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, Raja Pervez Ashraf, is here. May I request you all to kindly rise for the national anthem of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Honorable Speaker, with your permission, I start the proceedings of the concluding ceremony of the third regional seminar for the Asia-Pacific region, Parliaments on Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We begin with the recitation from Holy Quran by Qari Sadaqat Hussain.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العظيم.
God, most gracious, it is He who has taught the Quran. He has created man. He has taught him speech and intelligence. The sun and the moon follow courses exactly commuted, and the herbs and the trees both alike bow in adoration. And the firmament has He raised high, and He has set up the balance of justice, in order that you may not transgress due balance. So establish weight with justice and fall not short in the balance. It is He who has spread out the earth of His creators, therein and fruit and date palms producing spathes enclosing dates. Also corn with its leaves and stalk for fodder and sweet-smelling plants. Then which of the favor of your Lord will you deny? Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Qari Sahib. Honorable Speaker, Raja Parvez Ashraf, and the chair of this concluding session, Honorable Sayyid Yusuf Gilani, former Prime Minister and leader of his party in the Senate of Pakistan, Senator Salim Mandviwala, Chairman of the Senate Standing Committee on Finance, Honorable Shaza Fatma Khaja, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Youth Affairs, and Madam Rumina Khurshid Alam, who is the convener of the SDGs in the National Assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the conclusion of 2 days of very exciting activity. Substantive discourses and discussions took place in this hall as well as in the 2 committee rooms. In total, there were 7 sessions where deliberations were held on all the aspects of SDGs, the 17 goals, and which were contributed by delegates from 20 countries, either physically or through or by their presence virtually. It goes without saying that our focus remained the environmental chaos that has been brought to planet Earth during the recent times, and especially the havoc created by the floods. In those discussions, there was an important session on women as well, where important intervention was made by the Federal Ombudsperson on harassment, Madam Kashmala Tariq. She wishes to present the compilation of all the progress of her department to the Honorable Speaker. May I request Madam Kashmala Tariq to come and present her compilation. The Honorable Deputy Speaker also joins us, the Honorable Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly of Pakistan. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. May I request Senator Salim Mandviwala, Chairman of the Senate Standing Committee on Finance, for his closing remarks.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Honorable Raja Parvez Ashraf, Speaker, National Assembly of Pakistan. Honorable Senator Yusuf Raza Gilani, former Prime Minister of Pakistan and former Speaker of the National Assembly. Honorable Rumina Khurshid Alam, Special Assistant to PM and Convener, National Parliamentary Task Force on SDGs. Honorable Shiza Fatma Khwaja, Special Assistant to PM and Youth Affairs. honorable delegates from Asia Pacific region, ambassadors, members of the National Assembly, provincial assemblies, legislative assemblies of Pakistan, and especially to media of Pakistan who's here covering this event. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate the National Assembly of Pakistan and Inter-Parliamentary Union for the successful organization of this Asia Pacific region seminar on SDGs. I hope that our guests who have joined from all over the world, and especially the Asia Pacific region, had a pleasant stay in Islamabad, in our beautiful capital. As everybody mentioned, and especially Mr. Mushahid, who was moderating the session today, that the clean environment and climate change is the major issue. And today, as you see, Pakistan is facing floods, and we keep hearing floods in Bangladesh, all over the world, especially in the developing nations. We feel that all this is happening because of the past developments that took place in the climate change. And sorry to say, they were all negative developments in the climate change, which is affecting the world today. And we are all suffering because of that. And this damage, you can see what has taken place in Pakistan, which was mentioned by others who were talking about climate change in this event today. And the figure has reached about $30 billion. Now this damage could not have been done even in a war if it took place. That has been done through climate change. So I feel the agenda in this event that took place of IPU and future events that will take place, we must raise this issue more seriously, not only on government level, but on parliament level, because we are the people eventually who do decide what kind of legislation needs to be done and what kind of protection we can give to our people. So I feel this issue of climate change should remain on top of the agenda of IPU and all other forums, parliamentary forums that are there to address climate change and to save humanity from climate change. Lastly, I wish the members of parliaments and delegates from all Asia Pacific region and parliaments a huge success with regard to their critical role in promoting SDGs in their parliamentary business and ensuring smooth implementation of SDG while leaving one behind. So I wish you all the success, and I hope we learn something from all what we have done in this IPU session, and we can further implement all the things that we have decided in this IPU event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. We have Shaza Fatma Khaja. Shaza, when she was elected in 2013, she was the youngest member. She was 25 at that time. And by her looks, she only looked 12. The looks are still the same. But at the moment, she is the Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Youth Affairs. May I request you, Madam, for your remarks?
Thank you very much, Shamoon Hashmi Saab, for that introduction. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Honorable Yusuf Raza Gilani Saab, ex-Prime Minister, Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Honorable Speaker, National Assembly of Pakistan. Honorable Salim Manviwala Saab, Senator and Chairperson of the Finance Committee in Senate. And Honorable Madam Rumina Khurshid Alam, Convener for the SDG Secretariat in Pakistan. My esteemed guests from across the Asia-Pacific regions, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a good afternoon. I would like to start with the very basics of what the Sustainable Development Goals mean. Sustainability at its very core, essentially, means that our younger generations and our upcoming generations are able to enjoy and reap the joys of Mother Earth that at least as well as our older generations did, if not better. And therefore, when we talk about sustainable development, while we do understand that some of our countries, our fellow countries, are facing an issue of declining population, most of our region is at this point in time faced with a youth bulge. Asia-Pacific region hosts about 55% of the total global youth that is there. Pakistan alone has 150 million people under the age of 30. We have 100 million people under the age of 15. So the youth is no longer the future of this world. The youth is actually the present. The youth is here. And there is no dialogue, there is no intervention possible or can be made successful without inclusion of young people in every single dialogue that happens, whether it is in the public sphere, in the private sphere, in our international conferences. It is absolutely imperative to add and hear the voice of young people who will eventually be facing the consequences if we're unable to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Whether it's malnutrition, food security, whether it's access to health, whether these micro-level issues, right to shelter life, to transnational issues like climate change, every single aspect is directly related to the inclusion of young people in our dialogues. Similarly, while we talk about young people, almost half of the population of the world is women. It is absolutely, again, imperative to ensure that the voice of the women, the voice of all marginalized communities is heard when we talk about attaining Sustainable Development Goals. Gender parity, gender equity is something that we all are trying to achieve, but are quite far from it as an international community overall. And while it is one of the Sustainable Development Goals, I believe that without the inclusion of women, the overall achievement of SDGs will be impossible in case we fail to include women in our dialogue. When we talk about Sustainable Development Goals, when we talk about the future, we realize that the global landscape, whether it's employment, whether it's education, is changing by the hour. The technological advancement, the changes in technology that are taking place, it's actually becoming hard to keep up with the kind of employment opportunities that are available right now and to match them with the kind of education that is being imparted across the globe. And this is not just a Pakistan-specific problem, this is an international issue that we need to address. If we want to achieve our Sustainable Development Goals, we have to be ready for it. And we have to be ready for it by ensuring that our younger population and each and every member of the society, including people with special abilities, including religious minorities, including ethnic minorities, everyone has to be included when it comes to access to education and access to education which has a future. The jobs of the future are very different and will be very different from the jobs of the present. But the question is that are we ready for when that time comes? Are we ready for the change of pace that is happening in the global scenario when we look at the larger picture? In this regard, I would like to quickly conclude by saying that Asia Pacific is one of the lowest contributors to carbon emission across the globe, yet our countries are some of the most vulnerable. So I believe that it is the need of the hour that we come together, that we put our energies together in answering and addressing all of these issues, starting from education, malnutrition, gender issues, food security, access to health. We come together, we unite, and we formulate a single stance when we talk to the rest of the world. The rest of the world, which is a larger contributor to the issue of climate change, and we ensure that our right to the climate financing, to the carbon emission financing, is actually duly upheld. And until and unless we join and we unite together and put our voice together to ask and demand for our rights, it will be very difficult to attain them. In the end, I would just like to congratulate Honorable Speaker Raja Parvez Ashraf Saab on the successful completion of this very fruitful dialogue and two-day seminar. I'd also like to appreciate Madam Rumina Khurshid Alam, who's the convener of Pakistan's Sustainable Development Goal Secretariat at the National Assembly of Pakistan, her team, the team of the National Assembly of Pakistan itself, our staff, for conducting this event flawlessly. We understand and we realize the months of efforts, tireless efforts that go behind preparing and then conducting such platforms. Lastly, I would like to thank our honorable guests from across Asia Pacific, members of the parliament, our fellow colleagues, for coming to Pakistan, for honoring us with your presence, and I hope that you had a good stay. I hope that you got to see Islamabad, the beautiful city that it is, and you were not just confined to the hall rooms. And we hope that we'll be able to, and we would like to welcome you all again soon in Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam, for your address. Ladies and gentlemen, Shaza Fatma Khaja represents the face of that youthful parliament that we are experiencing in the present times. At the moment, 105 members of the parliament are in the young parliamentarians' record, either less than 40 or touching the age of 40. And a remarkable example in this context is our illustrious young, youthful Deputy Speaker, the Zahid Akram Durrani, who is also in that record. As Madam Shaza very clearly indicated, that this seminar has been a collective effort to draw the attention of our colleagues in the fraternity of parliamentarians from Asia Pacific on the burning issue of environmental degradation. And I can see very noted names from the civil society. Ahmed Bilal Saab is sitting here from Bildat, and so many others who would note this effort of the National Assembly that has gone. May I now request the head of the Iranian delegation, Dr. Malik Fazali, to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of all the foreign delegates. As I informed you earlier, we had a presence of 10 physical delegations, 5 who joined us virtually, and 5 were at the mission level. So in total, 20 delegations participated. May I request you, sir, head of the Iranian delegation, for your remarks.
There. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. On behalf of all delegation participating in this regional seminar, I would like to thank the Speaker of the National Assembly of Pakistan for inviting us and making excellent arrangement for the seminar. I would also like to condole with the government of Pakistan and people of Pakistan and Parliament of Pakistan for on the loss of precious life and infrastructure due to recent disastrous floods. On behalf of my country and the entire Asian and Pacific region, I would like to convey our prayer and best wishes to the affected people. Thank you, everybody, and God bless all nations of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency Dr. Fazali. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very special occasion today in this closing ceremony because the podium is adorned by not one, but two former Prime Ministers of Pakistan. And as they both shared the podium, they also shared the term from 2008 to 2013 as first Syed Yusuf Gilani was the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and he was followed by our current Speaker, Raja Parvez Ashraf. May I request Honorable Syed Yusuf Gilani for this few remarks, sir?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Speaker, Raja Parvez Ashraf Saab, honorable delegates, I want to congratulate the organizers and the people of Pakistan and the Speaker of the National Assembly of Pakistan for organizing such a beautiful seminar. And I've heard the speeches and their comments. I'm really impressed, and we benefit from your experience. And I, as a parliamentarian, always feel that people-to-people contacts are extremely important. And therefore, this forum is the right forum from where we can learn from your experience, and surely we can share your experience and we can always improve through your comments. I once again thank the Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly of Pakistan for organizing such a beautiful event with the IPU. I had been the member of the IPU, I had been the member of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Associations. Therefore, these forums do play a very important role. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, there's an old Chinese saying, women hold half of the sky. When it comes to holding of the seminar, Rumina Khurshid Alam held the entire sky. May I request you, Madam, for presenting the outcome document of this seminar?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Raja Parvez Ashraf, Speaker of the National Assembly of Pakistan. Honorable Senator Yusuf Raza Gilani, former Prime Minister of Pakistan and former Speaker of National Assembly of Pakistan. Honorable Senator Salim Manviwala. My fellow colleague, Madam Shaza Fatma Khwaja, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister Youth Affairs. Honorable parliamentarians and delegates from Asia-Pacific region. Members of the National Assembly, Senate, all provisional and legislative assemblies of Pakistan, distinguished guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It was an honor for Pakistan to host third regional parliamentary seminar on sustainable development goals under the able guidance of Honorable Speaker, Mr. Raja Parvez Ashraf. We envision a diverse and developed Asia-Pacific region. At the onset, let me congratulate the Inter-Parliamentary Union and the National Assembly for hosting the conference. I would like to thank national and international members of Parliament from Iran, Maldives, Nepal, Republic of Korea, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, China, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Canada, Mongolia, Thailand, Malaysia, and all those have joined us virtually as well in Azerbaijan and Turkey on special invites for their presence and inputs in finalizing joint future strategy on achieving SDGs with focus on climate mitigation. As a result of your extensive deliberations and focused recommendations, we have been able to finalize the outcome. Documents for the third regional seminar for the Asia-Pacific region parliaments on achieving the SDGs, the documents entitled Your Valuable Inputs, Recommendations, and while the same has been shared with you, I take the opportunity to briefly read the outcome document in order to unanimously adopt it. The document states, we, members of parliaments from the Asia-Pacific region, have gathered in person and remotely for the third regional seminar on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, taking place in Islamabad, Pakistan on 13 and 14 September, jointly organized by the Inter-Parliamentary Union, IPU, in the National Assembly of Pakistan. This seminar is the third of its kind and was built on the conclusion of the previous seminars. Hosted by the Parliament of Vietnam in 2017 and the Parliament of Mongolia in 2018, as well the IPU's virtual SDGs events. We greatly appreciate the strong commitment shown by the National Assembly of Pakistan in hosting this event despite unprecedented challenges that the country is currently experiencing. The devastating floods that are hitting the country have left more than 1,100 dead and 1,600 injured. They have destroyed crops, infrastructure, and buildings, and left millions homeless. We would like to express our deepest solidarity and sympathy to the Parliament and people of Pakistan, with the hope that the country will be able to recover soon. We also hope that the country will be able to recover soon. We also hope that thanks to the sharing of knowledge and experience at its important event, together we will be able to identify effective solutions to fight climate change and implement the SDGs. Big carbon polluters should take more responsibility for climate change, meet their obligations, and do their utmost to reduce carbon emissions as many poor countries are disproportionately shouldering the burden of climate-related impacts. In this regard, we propose to include the flood crisis Pakistan is currently experiences as a potential emergency item in upcoming 145th IPU Assembly taking place in October 2022 in Rwanda. Titled Parliaments and the Pandemic SDGs in the Time of COVID-19, the seminar provided a space for the interparliamentary dialogues on how to support the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals in the region despite the COVID-19 pandemic and other crises. Including climate change, there is an urgent need to accelerate progress and address existing problems by adopting coherent strategies. Parliaments can drive significant change towards sustainable development. They can translate the SDGs into enforceable laws. They can monitor implementation of these two laws. They can ensure that government is accountable to the people for the national progress on the SDGs. They can make sure that the needs of all society, especially underrepresented, marginalized, and or vulnerable groups are duly taken into consideration and addressed. Distinguished parliamentarians, the task at hand for us as people representative is to ensure that the will of the people is carried out in the system of governance for the entire Asia-Pacific region. The region has made progress in socioeconomic development, but the rate of development has remained uneven. We are confronted with a number of challenges of rapid urbanization, rising inequality, climate change, significant demographic shifts, and growth rate. Gender inequalities in employment, education, access to healthcare, assets, and technology, among other things, are widespread. Women's participation in decision-making and leadership positions has increased over the last 2 decades, but it remains lower than the global average of 25%. In some sub-region, it's even lower. The challenges of achieving SDGs by 2030 has been magnified during the recent years due to the challenges of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and increase in intensity and frequency of natural disasters. COVID-19 pandemic has reversed previous decades' resulting in shifts in priorities and emphasis on development initiatives, with greater emphasis placed on dealing with the pandemic. I would once again like to draw your attention towards the devastating floods that have affected 1/3 of the country and have impacted over 33 million people. The flood's preliminary economic damage estimate exceed $10 billion. Food insecurity and malnutrition were already at critical levels in areas severely impacted by the floods. Pakistan has only contributed 0.4% of the global carbon emissions since 1954, but it is paying a heavy price of climate change. I would like to request the Speaker of National Assembly to move an emergency item at the forthcoming IPU General Assembly in Rwanda to highlight the plight of affected people of Pakistan and consequences of climate degradation. Let's work together to address the threats brought on by extreme poverty, conflict, food insecurity, unemployment, and climate change in the region. I wish you a safe journey to your country. In the end, I would like to thank the National Assembly Secretariat officers, particularly our worthy Secretary, Mr. Tahir Hussain, Additional Secretary, Special Initiatives, Syed Shamoon Hashmi, head of all the departments, including International Relations Department, Protocol Branch, our Media and Social Media Department, our Chief Cameraman, Mr. Zafar, and his team, Project Management Unit and Special Initiatives, our Research and our Library Department, PIPS Legislation Reporters, IT, our SIS Interpretations, Telecasting, Digital Innovation Hub, admin, janitorial staff, and all the departments and the support staff for smooth execution for this seminar. And in the end, my very own SDGs Secretariat, my young team of their untiring efforts in managing this seminar. Thank you everyone for joining us in Islamabad. I hope you had a good time and the Parliament of Pakistan appreciate your participation. And also in the very end, I just wanted to bring in another announcement, and that all the pictures, all the material you can easily get from the website of the National Assembly or from the SDG Secretariat website. And I would also like to inform you that this event has been top trending on social media, Twitter, from last 2 days, which shows how your presence in Pakistan is not only appreciated, but the parliamentary efforts highlighted climate change and has been discussed. Thank you very much. We love you all. Hope to see you again, and may you have a safe and sound journey. With this regard, thank you so much. Pakistan Zindabad, Pakistan Paindabad.
Thank you very much, Madam, for your address. May I now request the Honourable Speaker of the National Assembly, Raja Parvez Ashraf, for his concluding remarks and his announcement of closing the seminar.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Senator Sayyid Yusuf Raza Gilani Sahab, former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Rumina Khurshid Alam, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister and Convener of SDGs Secretariat in the National Assembly, Shaza Fatima Khwaja, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Youth, Honorable Senator Salim Mandviwala, distinguished parliamentary delegates from the Asia-Pacific region, Excellencies, Honorable Ministers and Members of Parliament,
ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and warmest greetings. It is a matter of great honor for myself and the National Assembly of Pakistan that the third IPU regional seminar for the Asia-Pacific region parliaments on achieving SDGs has been a resounding success with regards to wholehearted participation by all countries, delegates, and excellencies. At the very onset, I wish to comment and thank all of you for supporting wholeheartedly Pakistan's National Assembly's endeavors to move an emergency resolution item at the forthcoming IPU General Assembly in Rwanda to highlight the plight of the flood-affected people of Pakistan and the consequences of climate degradation on vulnerable economies of developing countries. I am also happy to note that the IPU President has assured to support this resolution. While I also thank the Asia-Pacific Group for endorsing this move, I earnestly hope that we will all join hands to jointly make it our common cause and ensure its success in Kigali. I extend my heartiest gratitude to the President of the International Parliamentary Union, Mr. Dorothy Pachu, and the entire IPU staff for their continuous and close cooperation with the National Assembly of Pakistan. I wholeheartedly thank all the distinguished delegates and each member of the Parliament from all the participating Asia-Pacific region parliaments who traveled all the way to Islamabad from their home countries for making this seminar so interactive and meaningful. It indeed reflects their strong and uncompromising resolve to implement the SDGs global agenda as their own national plan towards making our respective societies as well as this planet at large more livable, prosperous, and safer place for future generations. I have been closely following the keynote addresses and the deliberations of the two-day seminar. I am really happy to see the high level of engagement, interest, and interactive participation of all worthy delegates with regard to key challenges of global climate change, poverty, hunger, and malnutrition, quality education, equitable health, and last but not the least, empowered women who can consolidate our national development plans with their dynamic contribution. You have rightly identified during your deliberations as well as the outcome document that global climate change has become a menace to our planet and our common future and coming generations. More frequent and intense drought, storms, heat waves, rising sea levels, melting glaciers, and warming oceans caused due to rising world temperature. As consequence of carbon emissions from industry and vehicles can directly harm animals, destroy the places they live, and wreak havoc on people's livelihood and communities. I hope you will incorporate proactive policy making and implementation of recommendation vis-a-vis global climate change as the top priority in your prospective national plans. I was heartened by the unwavering solidarity that all participating countries have expressed to myself and my colleagues in support of the resilient people of Pakistan standing tall in an exemplary and united effort to face the devastation caused by the recent floods. Ladies and gentlemen, parliamentarians have the constitutional role and responsibility to play an important role in supporting and overseeing the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I will urge upon all the Asia-Pacific region's parliaments attending this seminar to proactively move with 2 initiatives on returning to their countries. In the end, I again congratulate the organizers for their excellent work and greatly thank the distinguished delegates for their noteworthy participation. I thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Pakistan Zindabad. With this, I declare the 3rd regional seminar on SDGs closed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. With this, we come to the conclusion. The tea waits for you. Thank you very much for joining us.